The quiet murmur of dinner conversation filled Martinez's family restaurant on a typical Tuesday evening in downtown Atlanta. The warm glow of pendant lights cast a cozy atmosphere over couples enjoying their meals and families sharing stories over plates of authentic Mexican cuisine. Among them sat Sarah Thompson, dressed in a casual black blazer and white blouse, quietly reviewing case files on her tablet while waiting for her order. No one in the restaurant could have predicted how the next 15 minutes would unfold. A series of events that would not only go viral but spark a national conversation about prejudice, power, and the dangerous assumptions we make about others. Officer James Roberts had been with the Atlanta Police Department for 12 years. His colleagues knew him as a strict enforcer of the law, sometimes too eager to prove his authority. That evening, he received what seemed like a routine call about suspicious activity at Martinez's, a report of someone possibly casing the restaurant while pretending to be a customer. As Officer Roberts stepped through the restaurant's entrance, the bell above the door chimed softly. His eyes immediately locked onto Sarah, the only black woman dining alone in the establishment. Without bothering to speak with the restaurant staff or verify the complaint, he made his way directly to her table, his hand already resting on his belt. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step outside with me," Roberts announced loudly, causing several nearby diners to look up from their meals. Sarah glanced up from her tablet, her expression calm but confused. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice steady and professional. What happened next would be captured by dozens of cell phones, shared millions of times across social media, and become a turning point in the ongoing national dialogue about racial profiling. Officer Roberts, either unable or unwilling to recognize the measured response of a trained professional, began to grow visibly agitated. "Stand up slowly and place your hands where I can see them," he commanded, his voice rising. The restaurant had fallen silent now, the only sounds coming from the kitchen where the staff continued working, unaware of the tension building in the dining room. Sarah, drawing upon years of training, remained composed while carefully assessing the situation. "Officer, I believe there's been a misunderstanding," she began, maintaining direct eye contact while slowly reaching for something in her blazer. Roberts immediately tensed, his hand moving to his weapon. "Hands where I can see them," he shouted, causing several diners to gasp and push back from their tables. The next few seconds seemed to unfold in slow motion. Sarah, still projecting remarkable calm, continued her measured movement. "Sir, I'm reaching for my credentials," she stated clearly, her voice carrying across the now silent restaurant. "I'm a federal agent with the FBI, and I'm currently working on an active case." But Officer Roberts had already made up his mind about what was happening in front of him. In a move that would later be scrutinized by millions, he drew his weapon and aimed it at Sarah, ordering her to put her hands behind her back. The other diners watched in horror as the scene escalated, many recording with their phones, others too shocked to move. What no one in the restaurant knew at that moment was that Sarah Thompson wasn't just any FBI agent. She was the lead investigator on a major interstate trafficking case, and her presence at Martinez's that evening was part of a carefully orchestrated surveillance operation. The files on her tablet contained sensitive information about a network of criminals they'd been tracking for months. As Officer Roberts moved to place handcuffs on Sarah, backup units could be heard approaching outside, but they weren't responding to Roberts' call. They were part of something much bigger. The red and blue lights reflecting through the restaurant windows would reveal a truth that would leave Officer Roberts wishing he'd asked more questions before making assumptions. But before we reveal what happened next, we need to understand the events that led to this moment. We need to explore who Sarah Thompson really is, how she rose through the ranks of the FBI to become one of their most respected agents, and why she chose to handle this situation the way she did. Her story, and what transpired in those next few minutes at Martinez's, would become a powerful lesson about prejudice, professionalism, and the importance of looking beyond our preconceptions. This is a story about more than just a case of mistaken identity or racial profiling. It's about power, justice, and the complex dynamics that continue to shape our society. It's about the choices we make in crucial moments, and how those choices can either perpetuate harmful patterns or help break them down. Stay tuned as we uncover the full story of what happened that evening at Martinez's family restaurant, and how one officer's rush to judgment led to a moment that would change not only his career, but the entire conversation about law enforcement and racial bias in America. Sarah Thompson's journey to becoming an FBI agent began long before that fateful evening at Martinez's. Growing up in a military family in Norfolk, Virginia, she learned the values of discipline, integrity, and service from an early age. Her father, a retired Navy captain, and her mother, a civil rights attorney, had instilled in her a deep sense of justice and the importance of standing up for what's right. After graduating top of her class from Howard University with a degree in criminal justice, Sarah could have taken a comfortable position at any number of prestigious law firms. Instead, she chose to follow a path that would allow her to make a real difference in people's lives. The FBI Academy at Quantico proved to be just the beginning of her remarkable career. Over the next 8 years, Sarah built a reputation as one of the Bureau's most methodical and effective agents. Her colleagues often spoke about her unique ability to remain calm under pressure, a skill that would be put to the ultimate test that evening at Martinez's. She had worked on cases ranging from cybercrime to organized crime, but it was her current investigation that brought her to that small restaurant in Atlanta. For the past 18 months, Sarah had been leading a task force investigating a sophisticated human trafficking operation that spanned 3 states. The group had been using family-owned restaurants as fronts for their illegal activities, and Martinez's had caught their attention, not as a suspect establishment, but as a potential target for the criminals they were tracking. What Officer Roberts couldn't have known when he walked into the restaurant was that he wasn't just interrupting dinner, he was walking into the middle of a carefully planned FBI operation. Sarah had chosen her table specifically for its clear view of both the front entrance and the kitchen access door. The tablet she'd been reviewing contained surveillance photos and real-time updates from her team positioned outside. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on those who would later review the footage. While Officer Roberts was responding to a call about suspicious activity, he was unknowingly threatening the very person working to keep the community safe. But there was even more to the story that the cell phone videos didn't capture. Just 2 hours before the incident, Sarah had received intelligence suggesting that members of the trafficking ring were planning to visit Martinez's that very evening. Her team had been methodically gathering evidence for months, and they were finally closing in on the organization's leadership. The operation had required painstaking preparation, with undercover agents positioned strategically throughout the area. Meanwhile, Officer James Roberts had his own story, one that would come under intense scrutiny in the aftermath of the incident. His personnel file, which would later become part of the investigation, painted a complex picture. He had received multiple commendations for bravery in his early years on the force, but there were also concerning patterns in his recent conduct. 3 complaints had been filed against him in the past year alone, all involving allegations of overly aggressive behavior during routine stops. Each time, he had been cleared by internal affairs, but the pattern was there for anyone willing to see it. His supervisors had recommended additional training in de-escalation techniques, training that Roberts had consistently postponed. As Roberts stood there in Martinez's, his weapon trained on Sarah, he was unaware that his actions were threatening to compromise months of careful investigative work. The real suspects, the ones Sarah and her team were actually watching, were scheduled to arrive any minute. The operation that had taken months to set up was now teetering on the edge of collapse. Outside the restaurant, Sarah's FBI team was witnessing everything through their surveillance equipment. They had to make a crucial decision: reveal themselves to save their colleague and blow their cover, or wait and hope Sarah could defuse the situation without compromising the larger operation. The next few moments would require split-second decisions that would have far-reaching consequences. The tension in the restaurant had reached a breaking point. Other diners, their phones still recording, watched as Sarah remained surprisingly calm despite having a weapon pointed at her. Her years of training were evident in her measured breathing and steady gaze. She knew that her next words and actions would determine not only her safety, but the outcome of the entire operation. What happened next would send shockwaves through both the law enforcement community and the nation at large. As backup units converged on the scene and the red and blue lights continued to flash through the windows, a series of events was about to unfold that would change everything. The truth about why Sarah was really at Martinez's that evening, and what Officer Roberts' interference had set in motion, was about to come to light in a way that no one could have predicted. But before we reveal those crucial next moments, we need to understand the full scope of what was really happening behind the scenes that evening. The true magnitude of the operation Sarah was running, the identities of the real suspects her team was tracking, and the devastating impact that one officer's prejudiced assumptions could have on months of careful investigative work. In the tense atmosphere of Martinez's restaurant, time seemed to stand still. The soft Mexican music playing through the speakers created an almost surreal backdrop to the scene unfolding, a highly trained FBI agent facing down the barrel of a local police officer's weapon. But there was another layer to this story that none of the bystanders recording on their phones could have guessed. Just 2 tables away from Sarah sat Marcus Rodriguez, a junior agent on his first major undercover assignment. Dressed as a busboy and periodically wiping down nearby tables, he watched the situation with growing concern. He knew the real targets of their investigation were due to arrive in less than 10 minutes. Years of work tracking a human trafficking ring was hanging by a thread, all because of one officer's misguided assumptions. Through her earpiece, Sarah could hear the quiet chatter of her team coordinating outside. 3 vehicles approaching from the south, came the whispered update. Confirmed visual on primary targets. The weight of the moment pressed down on her. She needed to resolve this situation with Officer Roberts quickly, but any sudden moves could make things worse. Maria Martinez, the restaurant's owner, stood frozen behind the host station. She had been cooperating with the FBI for weeks, ever since Sarah had approached her about the trafficking ring attempting to use her restaurant as a money laundering front. Maria had agreed to help the investigation, understanding that her beloved family business could help bring down criminals who were destroying other families. Now she watched helplessly as everything threatened to unravel. Officer Roberts' partner, Officer Chen, had just pulled up outside. Through the window, she assessed the scene with growing unease. In their 3 years working together, she had noticed Robert's tendency to escalate situations, especially with people of color. She had tried to address it with him privately, even reported her concerns to their supervisor, but nothing had changed. Now, as she hurried toward the entrance, she hoped she could help defuse the situation before it got worse. Meanwhile, in an unmarked van parked across the street, FBI Section Chief David Martinez, no relation to the restaurant owners, was faced with an impossible decision. His team had spent 18 months building a case against one of the largest trafficking operations on the East Coast. The suspects were minutes away, but his lead agent was currently at gunpoint. If he ordered his team to intervene, they'd blow their cover and lose their only chance at catching the real criminals. If he didn't, Sarah's life could be in danger. The other diners in the restaurant had become unwitting participants in this drama. Among them was Dr. Karen Williams, a psychology professor at Emory University, who would later provide valuable testimony about the incident. She observed how Officer Roberts' body language and tone revealed deep-seated biases he might not even be aware of. Her cell phone footage would later become crucial evidence in the investigation that followed. Back at the Atlanta Police Department headquarters, a dispatcher was frantically trying to piece together what was happening. The original call about suspicious activity had come from a burner phone, a detail that would later prove significant. Records would show that similar calls had been made about other restaurants in the area, always targeting businesses where the FBI had ongoing surveillance operations. Sarah's mind raced through her options as she kept her hands visible on the table. Her FBI credentials were in her blazer pocket, easily accessible if Officer Roberts would just let her reach for them. She noted how his finger rested nervously on the trigger, a clear violation of proper firearm protocol. One wrong move could turn this already dangerous situation tragic. Through the kitchen's swinging doors, the restaurant's chef, Carlos Martinez, watched with growing anxiety. He knew about the FBI operation. His mother Maria had confided in him when the agents first approached her. He also knew that in exactly 7 minutes, the evening's food delivery was scheduled to arrive. But this wasn't just any delivery. It was a front for the trafficking ring's money collection route. If Officer Roberts was still here when they arrived, months of careful planning would be wasted. Outside, more patrol cars were arriving, their lights painting the restaurant's interior in alternating red and blue. The growing police presence was exactly what Sarah's team didn't need. It would spook their real targets. Through her earpiece, she heard the update she'd been dreading. Subject's vehicles making a U-turn. They've spotted the police presence. The next 60 seconds would prove crucial. Officer Chen was now entering the restaurant, taking in the scene before her. Sarah's FBI team was weighing their rapidly diminishing options. The real criminals were slipping away, and Officer Roberts, still convinced he was dealing with a suspicious person, had no idea he was about to become the subject of a national controversy that would raise serious questions about law enforcement training, racial bias, and the complex dynamics of justice in America. But the most shocking revelation of the evening was still to come, one that would change everything about how this incident would be understood. Because Sarah Thompson wasn't just any FBI agent, and this wasn't just any investigation. The truth about why she was really at Martinez's that night, and the larger conspiracy she had uncovered, was about to explode into public view in a way that would shake the foundations of both the Atlanta Police Department and the criminal underworld they were fighting. Officer Chen's entrance into Martinez's restaurant marked a pivotal moment in the unfolding drama. As she approached the scene, her footsteps echoing on the tile floor, she could read the situation clearly. Her partner had escalated things far beyond what was necessary. The restaurant had fallen so quiet that the gentle clinking of dishes from the kitchen sounded like thunder. "James," Officer Chen called out softly, using Robert's first name intentionally to humanize the moment. "Why don't we take a step back and assess the situation?" She positioned herself where both Roberts and Sarah could see her, her hands visible and away from her weapon. Through years of experience, she had learned that sometimes the bravest thing an officer could do was to de-escalate. Sarah Thompson remained perfectly still, her years of FBI training evident in her measured breathing and steady gaze. Through her earpiece, she could hear her team's increasingly urgent updates. The trafficking ring's vehicles had stopped their retreat and were now circling the block. Something about the situation had caught their interest. This development made everything more dangerous. Unknown to everyone in the restaurant, the real players in this drama were now moving into position. Two unmarked cars had quietly pulled into the alley behind Martinez's. Inside them were some of the FBI's most wanted criminals, drawn to the scene by the very police presence that threatened to derail the operation. They had spotted something that piqued their curiosity, something that would soon turn this already tense situation into something far more dangerous. Maria Martinez stood by the host station, her hand clutching her phone. She had just received a text message that made her blood run cold. The trafficking ring wasn't just sending their usual money collectors. One of their top lieutenants was personally coming to assess the situation. In all her years of running the restaurant, she had never been more frightened, yet she knew she had to maintain her composure to protect everyone inside. The surveillance team in the van across the street was picking up scattered radio communications that painted an alarming picture. The criminals weren't retreating, they were adapting their plans. Section Chief Martinez leaned forward, listening intently to the intercepted conversations. Whatever was about to happen would change everything, but they couldn't warn Sarah without compromising her cover. Officer Roberts' hand had started to shake slightly, a detail not lost on Dr. Williams, who continued recording the scene. The psychology professor recognized the signs of someone struggling with their own assumptions and authority being challenged. In her professional opinion, the next few moments would either lead to a breakthrough or a breakdown. Marcus Rodriguez, still maintaining his cover as a busboy, had carefully positioned himself near the kitchen's emergency exit. He knew that if things went wrong, he would need to move quickly to secure the back entrance. What he didn't know was that his role in the next few minutes would become crucial in ways nobody could have predicted. Through the restaurant's front windows, the red and blue lights continued their rhythmic dance, casting strange shadows across the faces of everyone inside. Sarah could see the growing crowd of onlookers gathering outside, their phones raised to capture whatever was about to unfold. But they were about to witness something none of them expected. Officer Chen had taken another step closer, her training and instincts telling her that this situation was about to shift dramatically. She had noticed something about Sarah's behavior that her partner had missed. A level of professional alertness that went beyond mere compliance. 20 years on the force had taught her to read people, and everything about this woman screamed law enforcement. In the kitchen, Carlos Martinez had just spotted something through the back window that made him freeze mid-motion. Two familiar faces had appeared, men he recognized from the FBI's surveillance photos, but they weren't supposed to be this close, and they weren't supposed to be armed. His mother's restaurant was about to become the epicenter of something much bigger than a case of mistaken identity. The words that crackled through Sarah Thompson's earpiece sent a chill down her spine. "Agent down at the perimeter. They knew we were here." In that moment, everything changed. This wasn't just about an officer's misguided arrest anymore. Someone had deliberately set up this confrontation to compromise their operation. The phone that rang belonged to Maria Martinez. The caller ID showed a number she had been dreading, the trafficking ring's lieutenant, Miguel Torres. Her hands trembling, she answered it while catching Sarah's eye across the restaurant. The message was clear. They'd had 10 minutes to clear out the restaurant, or their partnership would take a dark turn. Officer Chen noticed the supple shift in Sarah's posture, a nearly imperceptible tensing that only another trained professional would recognize. Something was happening beyond what she could see, and her instincts were screaming that they were all in danger. She took another calculated step forward, positioning herself where she could better protect the civilians still frozen at their tables. Through the kitchen windows, Carlos Martinez watched as more shadows moved in the alley. These weren't FBI agents or local police. Their movements were too irregular, too predatory. He counted at least 6 figures, all converging on his family's restaurant. His mother's involvement in the FBI operation had put them all at risk, but what he didn't know was that the real threat was already inside. Marcus Rodriguez, still maintaining his busboy cover, had been systematically counting exits and civilians. 23 people in the dining room, 4 in the kitchen, 3 entry points, and now, based on the reflections he could see in the decorative mirrors, multiple hostile subjects approaching. The math wasn't good. Officer Roberts' weapon remained trained on Sarah, but doubt had begun to creep into his expression. The woman before him wasn't acting like any suspect he'd encountered in his 12 years on the force. Her calm demeanor suggested someone intimately familiar with high-pressure situations. As sweat beaded on his forehead, a new thought began to form. What if he had walked into something much bigger than a routine suspicious person call? In the surveillance van, Section Chief Martinez was piecing together a disturbing reality. The original call about suspicious activity hadn't just been a coincidence. It was a calculated move. Someone had known about their operation and had used the local police to create a diversion. But as he reviewed the surveillance feeds, he noticed something even more alarming. The traffic cameras in a 4-block radius had all gone dark. Dr. Williams, still recording on her phone, noticed a pattern in the way new customers were entering the restaurant. They were spreading out strategically, taking positions near exits, their casual demeanor just a little too practiced. Her academic understanding of behavioral psychology was sending up red flags. These weren't ordinary diners. The back door that had slammed belonged to one of the kitchen staff, but not the one who was supposed to be on duty that night. Sarah's team had vetted all of Martinez's employees except for one, a new hire who had started that morning. The significance of this detail was about to become devastatingly clear. Through her earpiece, Sarah heard more chatter, this time about encrypted communications being detected in the area. The trafficking ring wasn't just sending muscle, they were coordinating something bigger. The question was, did they know about her, or were they only aware of the general FBI presence? Officer Chen's hand moved slowly toward her radio, but before she could call for backup, she caught a reflection in the window that made her pause. The gathering crowd outside wasn't just composed of curious onlookers. Trained eyes could spot the telltale signs of organized surveillance mixed among the civilians with their phones. In the kitchen, Carlos Martinez noticed something else. The delivery entrance's security camera had been subtly repositioned. Someone had created a blind spot, and they had done it professionally. His family's restaurant had become a chessboard, but no one could tell who was moving which pieces. Sarah Thompson knew she had to make a decision. Her cover was already compromised, but revealing herself now would put everyone in the restaurant at risk. The trafficking ring had orchestrated this entire situation, using Officer Roberts' predictable response to their anonymous call as a smokescreen for something far more sinister. What no one in the restaurant realized was that this entire scene, from the initial police call to the gathering crowds outside, was being orchestrated by someone who knew both the FBI's playbook and the Atlanta Police Department's standard responses. Someone who had spent years studying how law enforcement handled situations exactly like this one. And then, just as Officer Roberts began to lower his weapon, the lights went out. In the sudden darkness, multiple laser sights appeared on the walls, but they weren't all coming from law enforcement. The next few moments would reveal that everyone in Martinez's restaurant, the officers, the agents, the civilians, even the criminals, had all walked into an elaborate trap. The question was, who had set it, and why? In the pitch darkness of Martinez's restaurant, training took over. Sarah Thompson moved with practiced precision, using the chaos to her advantage. The laser sights dancing across the walls told her exactly what she needed to know. 3 hostile positions at the front, 4 at the back, and at least 2 in the dining room itself. But there was something off about their positioning, something that confirmed her growing suspicion about what was really happening. FBI, everyone down. Sarah's voice cut through the darkness with commanding authority. The sudden declaration froze Officer Roberts in place, his weapon still pointed where she had been sitting moments before. Officer Chen, already moving to protect nearby civilians, recognized the voice of a fellow law enforcement officer and immediately shifted her stance to provide coverage. The emergency lights kicked in, casting an eerie blue glow across the scene. In that moment, Sarah caught a glimpse of something that changed everything. The new kitchen worker was wearing the same watch as the trafficking ring's lieutenant, Miguel Torres. The pieces suddenly fell into place. This wasn't just a trap for the FBI. It was an internal power play within the criminal organization itself. Marcus Rodriguez, still in his busboy disguise, had positioned himself between the civilians and the most immediate threats. His hand moved to his concealed weapon, but Sarah's sharp command stopped him. Hold position. She had spotted what he hadn't. The laser sights weren't just targeting law enforcement. They were also trained on specific members of the trafficking ring. Officer Roberts, his world spinning as he realized his mistake, did something that would later be praised in training seminars across the country. He swallowed his pride and immediately shifted to support the FBI operation, turning his attention to protecting civilians. His years of training finally overcame his prejudices at the crucial moment. Through her earpiece, Sarah heard Section Chief Martinez's urgent update. Secondary team in position. ATF is on scene. Wait for my mark. The mention of the ATF confirmed what Sarah had begun to suspect. This wasn't just about human trafficking anymore. The restaurant had been chosen for a reason, and that reason was about to burst through the back door. Maria Martinez, still by the host station, watched as her brother Carlos emerged from the kitchen with his hands raised. But instead of fear, his face showed grim determination. They're using the old tunnel system, he announced loudly, triggering a reaction that revealed the true players in the room. 3 of the supposed hostile targets suddenly turned their weapons toward their own team members. The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Carlos had been working with the ATF for months, investigating a massive weapons smuggling operation that used the city's Prohibition-era tunnel system. The human trafficking investigation had accidentally uncovered something much bigger, and tonight's chaos was the result of both operations colliding. Officer Chen, piecing together the situation with remarkable clarity, made a decision that would later earn her a commendation. She used her radio to deliver a coded message that would trigger a department-wide response, but not in the way the criminals expected. Instead of calling in regular patrol units, she activated the department's newly formed anti-trafficking task force. The next 60 seconds unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance, as the trafficking ring's members realized they'd been betrayed by their own lieutenant, and the weapons smugglers discovered their tunnel system was compromised. Both criminal operations imploded. Internal accusations flew, along with the first shots, all carefully calculated by the FBI and ATF to miss any civilians. Sarah Thompson moved with lethal efficiency, her years of training evident in every motion. She neutralized 2 threats while simultaneously ensuring Officer Roberts' safety, a detail that wouldn't be lost on him during the subsequent internal affairs investigation. But it was what she did next that would make headlines across the country. As the combined law enforcement teams swept in to secure the scene, Sarah Thompson walked calmly back to her table, picked up her tablet, and revealed its contents to the stunned officers. On the screen was detailed intelligence about a corrupt network within multiple police departments. Departments that had been inadvertently helping the weapons smugglers by responding to false suspicious persons calls, just like the one that had brought Officer Roberts to Martinez's that night. The operation had netted not just the trafficking ring and weapons smugglers, but exposed a web of corruption that reached into the highest levels of law enforcement. Officer Roberts's mistaken arrest, which could have derailed everything, had instead provided the perfect cover for the final phase of a much larger investigation. As the dust settled and the emergency lights gave way to normal illumination, the full scope of what had occurred began to emerge. The viral videos of a black woman being wrongfully detained would still spark important conversations about racial profiling, but they would also reveal something more: how unconscious bias could be manipulated by criminal organizations to create chaos and confusion. But there was one final twist that no one saw coming. As Sarah Thompson led the arrest team into the tunnel system beneath the restaurant, they discovered something that would change the entire narrative. The weapons weren't just being smuggled, they were being stockpiled. And the evidence they found in those tunnels would lead them to uncover a conspiracy that would shake the foundations of law enforcement agencies across the entire eastern seaboard. The events at Martinez's restaurant that night would be studied in law enforcement academies for years to come, not just as a lesson about racial profiling and prejudice, but as a masterclass in how multiple agencies could work together to turn a potential disaster into one of the most successful joint operations in FBI and ATF history. In the weeks following the incident at Martinez's restaurant, the true impact of that evening began to unfold across the nation. The viral videos of Officer Roberts attempting to arrest FBI agent Sarah Thompson had indeed sparked crucial conversations about racial profiling in law enforcement. But the story had evolved into something far more complex and significant. The weapons cache discovered in the tunnel system led to the largest arms trafficking bust in Atlanta's history. Over 200 illegal firearms were recovered, along with evidence linking the operation to similar stockpiles in 5 other major cities. The investigation revealed that the trafficking ring had been exploiting old Prohibition-era tunnel networks all along the eastern seaboard, using legitimate businesses as unwitting cover for their operations. Maria Martinez's restaurant became a symbol of community cooperation with law enforcement done right. Rather than close her doors after the incident, she transformed Martinez's into a gathering place for community outreach programs. Local police officers and FBI agents would often stop by, not for surveillance operations, but to build genuine relationships with the neighborhood they served. Officer James Roberts' story took an unexpected turn. Instead of retiring or resigning in disgrace, he chose a different path. The incident had forced him to confront his own biases, leading him to become an advocate for change within the department. He began working with Dr. Karen Williams, the psychology professor who had witnessed the event, to develop new training programs addressing unconscious bias in police work. Officer Chen's quick thinking and professional conduct during the operation earned her a promotion to sergeant. She now heads the department's newly established community relations unit, using the lessons learned from that night to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the communities they serve. Her approach to de-escalation has become a model for police departments nationwide. For Sarah Thompson, the success of the operation brought both professional recognition and personal reflection. The case had exposed how criminal organizations could exploit societal prejudices to their advantage, using predictable law enforcement responses as smokescreens for their activities. Her report on these tactics became required reading at the FBI Academy. Marcus Rodriguez, the undercover agent posing as a busboy, received commendations from both the FBI and ATF for his role in protecting civilians during the operation. His experience that night shaped his approach to future undercover work, emphasizing the importance of maintaining cover while ensuring public safety. Carlos Martinez's cooperation with the ATF had put his family at risk, but it had also helped bring down 2 major criminal operations. The tunnel system beneath the restaurant, once a conduit for illegal weapons, was sealed and documented. Urban development teams now use the ATS maps of these forgotten tunnels to prevent their future exploitation by criminal enterprises. The corrupt law enforcement network exposed by the operation led to 43 arrests across 7 states. The investigation revealed how criminal organizations had spent years placing cooperatives in strategic positions, using them to redirect police resources away from their activities. The cleanup operation would continue for months, ultimately strengthening law enforcement integrity across the region. Dr. Williams' cell phone footage became more than just another viral video of police misconduct. Her professional analysis of the incident, combined with her observations of how the situation was handled by all parties, contributed to a groundbreaking study on law enforcement psychology. Her work now helps departments across the country recognize and address systemic issues in police training. Perhaps the most significant outcome was the creation of the Joint Operations Protocol, a new framework for cooperation between local police departments and federal agencies. The protocol, inspired by the events at Martinez's, established clear guidelines for handling situations where jurisdictions and operations might overlap, emphasizing communication and cooperation over confrontation. Section Chief Martinez used the lessons learned from that night to reform how the FBI conducts long-term surveillance operations. New protocols were established for coordinating with local law enforcement, ensuring that future operations wouldn't be compromised by simple miscommunications or jurisdictional oversights. 1 year after the incident, Martinez's restaurant hosted a unique gathering. Officer Roberts, now a trainer in the police academy's reformed community engagement program, sat across from Agent Thompson, sharing their perspectives with a new class of recruits. Their conversation, honest and sometimes uncomfortable, demonstrated how a moment of confrontation could transform into an opportunity for genuine understanding and change. The weapons stockpile case eventually led investigators to uncover a larger conspiracy involving international arms dealers using America's forgotten infrastructure as their personal storage network. This discovery prompted a nationwide initiative to map and secure similar historical tunnel systems in other cities, preventing their exploitation by criminal enterprises. As for the real masterminds behind the trafficking operation, their attempt to use racial profiling as a smokescreen for their activities had backfired spectacularly. Instead of exploiting law enforcement's weaknesses, they had inadvertently exposed them, leading to meaningful reforms and stronger community bonds. The story of that night at Martinez's restaurant continues to resonate because it represents more than just a confrontation between a local police officer and an FBI agent. It stands as a testament to how crisis can become opportunity, how prejudice can be overcome by professionalism, and how the complex web of law enforcement can work together when it matters most. In the end, what began as a moment of potential tragedy became a catalyst for positive change, reminding us that the path to justice requires constant vigilance, not just against external threats, but against our own preconceptions and biases. The lessons learned that night continue to influence law enforcement training, community relations, and the ongoing effort to build a more equitable justice system for all Americans.